The mainstream media in the United States hasn't lost just a little bit of trust. It has lost almost all of its credibility. No matter what side of the political spectrum you're on, if you're a liberal or a conservative, even if you don't follow politics, you're not going to trust the mainstream media. This is a new report that has come out. We're going to be examining this in this video. But as we do that, we're also going to be examining just why the mainstream media is imploding, why people are turning to YouTube channels like ours for their news instead of CNN. We're going to be examining the outright partisanship, the unconditional support for President Biden, and the refusal to hold him to any sort of scrutiny at all. Because ultimately, this is a problem. It's not a problem that's going to be getting better anytime soon either. This is an issue that, left unchecked, will erode American democracy too. You're watching Political, and please do remember to like, sub, and comment. Now, Yaron, the mainstream media lies a lot, and we've seen that throughout the last 4 years, the Russia hoax being the prime example of that, but now they're kind of openly operating as Biden's communications team, aren't they?
Yeah, I think that's one way of putting it. I mean, listen, we saw the left, we saw the mainstream media drop all of the kind of journalistic values and principles that you would expect that they would hold dear in a concerted effort to get rid of Trump. And if there was any doubt whether they were going to continue to fawn over Biden once they got him into power, or whether they were going to, start doing their job, it seems already, and we're only less than a week into Biden's administration, that certainly it's just going to be business as usual. And I wanted to show you this article from last week from CNN, because it's the perfect example of it. They've brought back their good old friend, the anonymous source, to essentially act as a propaganda arm for Biden. So this was from CNN. It said, newly sworn in President Joe Biden and his advisors are inheriting no coronavirus vaccine distribution plan to speak of from the Trump administration. Sources tell CNN, posing a significant challenge for the new White House. The administration has promised to try to turn the COVID-19 pandemic around and drastically speed up the pace of vaccinating Americans against the virus. Well, that's not true, is it? But in the immediate hours following Biden being sworn into office on Wednesday, sources with direct knowledge of the new administration's COVID-related work told CNN one of the biggest shocks is that the Biden team had to digest during the transition period was that they saw a complete lack of vaccine distribution strategy under President Trump, even weeks after multiple vaccines were approved for use in the United States. There is nothing for us to rework. We're going to have to build everything from scratch, one source said. Another source described the moment that it became clear that Biden administration would have to essentially start from square one because there was simply no plan. Wow, just further affirmation of complete incompetence. Now, obviously, we had a video before. We were talking about how Biden's vaccine plan is actually setting himself a lower target than the Trump administration was already achieving when he took office. And a plan which he called a dismal failure, which makes absolutely zero sense. But they're using, again, anonymous sources effectively to act as a propaganda arm. Fauci came out not long after this, and he said, no, we're not starting from scratch on vaccine distribution. He said, we're certainly not starting from scratch because there is an activity going on in the distribution. He said, we're going in with fresh ideas, but also some ideas that were not bad ideas from the previous administration. You can't say it was absolutely not usable at all. It's taking what's going on, but amplifying it in a big way, he says, which naturally he would. But you see this, we saw this obviously during the election campaign. They would use their anonymous sources to effectively act as a propaganda arm of the Democratic Party. They get to say what they want, but they don't face any accountability for it because it's all anonymous sources. And the Biden administration can just, claim plausible deniability. Oh, we didn't say that. I don't know what you're talking about. But obviously this headline goes out everywhere and Americans see this and they're like, oh my God, there's no vaccine plan.
Yeah, and it's the brash arrogance of it, isn't it? That's the bit that gets you, because even if you don't recognize the data trick, and we exposed that in our last video, I suggest you check it out if you haven't already, but even if you don't recognize the data trick and you don't necessarily realize that vaccination is going to slow under President Biden, you saw the vaccination plan in action. You saw numbers go up of the number of people getting vaccinated. And So for CNN to produce a so-called anonymous source saying that there's basically nothing to work with and it wasn't really going ahead anyway, I mean, it's gaslighting you and it's forcing you to look at your own memory and say, no, that's wrong, and to question, like your own beliefs. It's what people in abusive relationships do, like they tell you, oh, you never said that, or they tell you, oh yeah, I told you about this so long ago. And that's kind of gets to the core of it, doesn't it? Because the mainstream media sees the relationship with the end consumer as, well, as an abuser sees a battered wife, right? There's someone who's there to manipulate and control, and they'll always come back for more. As long as you can keep them coming back for more, you're fine. It doesn't actually matter about taking care of their needs, right?
Yeah, and I never used to know the word until I used to hear it from the left all the time when Trump came into power. But gaslighting really describes perfectly what it is that they're essentially trying to do. And then it makes you realize that it's just another part of this whole projection that comes from so many Democrats in the mainstream media. They often just did accuse Trump over those 4 years of exactly the things that they were doing all of the time. And that's what's so infuriating about it. But yeah, I have this one as well. This is from Daily Caller. You may have remembered that Washington Post had this kind of, this list of things that they had deemed lies by Trump, that got to the point it was so ridiculously laughable. It was like thousands and thousands of different things on it. And you might think, okay, well, that's like a perfectly reasonable thing to do. But Trump's gone now. Here's the new administration. You're going to continue that on, right? No, is the answer, apparently. So the Washington Post has ended its false claim project for President Donald Trump on Wednesday and has no current plan to start a new database for President Biden. The paper told Daily Caller, throughout Trump's 4 years as president, the Post fact checkers said that 30,000 odd or misleading claims. This number was really revealed shortly after Biden officially became the 46th president. Glenn Kessler, editor and chief fact checker, what a title, for the Post's fact checking team, tweeted that he would never would have believed this number was possible when they started 4 years ago. And he says that the database for Trump's claims started a month after Trump became president as a way to not overwhelm the fact checking enterprise, where the core mission was to explain the complex policy ideas. While we do not have plans to launch a Biden database at this time, we will continue to dig in the accuracy of statements by political figures of all party affiliations. But, when you're I don't necessarily agree with this idea, disagree with this idea in principle. You have the administration that's in power, you have the president that's in power, you hold them to account. Sure, if you think there are things that they're saying that are objectively wrong, not things that you're just, where you're inserting yourself into the story and, going, oh, well, basically, writing a fact check article, masquerading itself as a fact check, but it's actually just an opinion piece of why you disagree with it. If it's an objectively false thing, like if they say, I did this in, Biden often does. And I use Biden as an example because obviously he's the one in power. When Biden says, I marched in the civil rights movement, that's an objectively false thing. Or when he says that, I was against the Iraq war, that's an objectively false thing. Or when he says that, I've always been for fracking, or I said I'm not going to, stop fracking, that's an objectively false thing. Those are all objectively false things, where he's either contradicting himself because he's lying, or he's forgot, or he's changed his mind, fine. But, just putting that information out there to people and say, okay, this is objectively false. This isn't an opinion piece. This thing that he said there is false, and we just want to make you aware of that. That's fine. But do it to Biden as well. He's in power now. Let's hold him to account. Let's scrutinize him. And if he's coming out and saying stuff that's false, sure, and it's objectively false and it's not opinion, just, call it out. Fine. But obviously, it's one rule for Trump, it's another rule for Biden. They're worried about obviously damaging him now that he's the one that's in power.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a question of fairness, isn't it? I mean, you have such unproliferated partisanship that dominates the entire fact-checking industry. I mean, if you want to go and check politicians and you want to hold them accountable and you want to see if they lie or not, then good, that should be encouraged, and every single conservative in the world is going to back you because they've been saying it longer than you. But when the left, they kind of talk about deprogramming conservatives and at the same time as they're talking about, making peace with them and stuff. And then you see something like the fact-checking industry, which are nothing but polemic. And then the mainstream media uses those facts, so-called checked facts, in their own reports and things. It just really creates an atmosphere where conservatives just aren't welcome in the mainstream. And that's exactly what happens. And, I kind of get why WAPO would end the False Claims Project. Let's face it, the industry is going to collapse now because we all know Joe Biden doesn't tell lies and there's no reason to hold him to account, right? It's just such nonsense. And remember, actually, the fact-checking of Donald Trump happened before he became president, okay? If you go back to the 2016 debates, Hillary Clinton every 5 minutes is going, check my website, check my website. And Joe Biden just doesn't get any of the same scrutiny. So really, that really damages half of the population of the United States trust in the establishment and the mainstream media when they see such glaring polarization and polemic masquerading itself as truth-checking and, neutral fact-checking. It's nonsense.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, and you're masquerade. You're using the kind of the trust that people have when they see the words fact check, right? You're using that trust that people have and abusing it by slotting in essentially your own little opinion piece into it. And then it boils back down then to this original point that we're talking about, trust in the media. This is why people don't trust the media. When they see fact checks, and actually it's not a fact check at all. It's just, here's what I think, but I'm going to pretend that it is. Or essentially they strawman what the fact is that they're actually checking by, or by fact checking a misleading, outrageous thing anyway that no one's ever asking. So, speaking of which, anyway, this is obviously the kind of the whole point of the video I think we're coming back to. Trust in the media is at an all-time low. Majority of people believe reporters purposely trying to mislead people. And they're right. They're absolutely right. In the mainstream media, it's all now just opinions. None of it is really about providing scrutiny or holding power to account or merely just providing people with the knowledge they need to make informed decisions when it comes to elections. So each year, the American people seem to trust the media less and less. This year's annual survey from Elderman shows trust in traditional media and social media are at all-time lows. The annual trust barometer shared exclusively with Axios found fewer than half of Americans trust traditional media for the first time since the survey began. And these are the questions that they asked them. 56% of Americans agree with the statement that journalists and reporters are purposely trying to mislead people by saying things they know are false or gross exaggerations. 58% think that most news organizations are more concerned with supporting an ideology or political position than with informing the public. They're right. The Edelman repolled Americans after the election. The figures had deteriorated even further, with 57% of Democrats trusting the media and only 18% of Republicans. So when you look at those figures, right, 18% for Republicans is perhaps a little bit more understandable, in the sense that obviously most of the mainstream media is left-wing, CNN, MSNBC, NBC, all of those guys. And then on the right, in terms of the mainstream, you pretty much just have Fox, So it's understandable why the number's even lower for Republicans. I'm actually kind of surprised that the number is so low for Democrats. Half of Democrats essentially have no trust in the media or don't trust the media. And it's like most of them are listening to media that basically affirm their own confirmation bias in the first place. So it's very easy for them to fall into the trap of just going, well, they're saying what I think, so they're probably right, because no one thinks that they're wrong. So the fact that half of Democrats can still see that, the media is very misleading and they're often just telling them what they think they want to hear, is astounding in its own and is quite encouraging, really, that maybe things will change. But I think the whole point of all of this is that when it comes to the mainstream media, they're there to really, their number one job is to scrutinize government, hold them to account. If they do something wrong, make sure that people are aware of it, as a journalist, go around and dig a little bit, look for things, find out when things are being covered up, try and improve transparency. These are all the jobs. These are the jobs of journalists. That's really what they're there for. That's what the mainstream media is there for. And if they're not scrutinizing one side and they are heavily scrutinizing the other side, unfairly so, then you can't have, this fair democracy, I suppose. It's not a fair democracy because people aren't fairly informed about what's going on. And that's the situation right now.
Yeah, definitely. And it's such an important point because what you're seeing is because of the failure of networks like CNN and so on, those journalists who do go out digging and exposing corruption and finding those stories that are so important to the lifeblood of any democracy, they're getting shut down. They're not getting the views, they're not getting the ratings. And this is simply because if the state of the media industry is so bloody rubbish to begin with, then you might as well go in for a penny in for a pound. That's why you see people on the right going to Joe Rogan or Ben Shapiro for news, even Alex Jones, who we all know and love, or if you go on the left, the Young Turks as well. These people are very funny, they're very entertaining, but they're not journalists because they don't go out and develop those stories. So, and you have the media industry collapsing, there is something to lose. So when we take an introspective look at the media, why just if you were running a business and you were making a good profit, but you were seeing your profit decline year on year, you would be so utterly you'd panic, wouldn't you? You'd put in measures to change things going. And what we see is we see journalists acting absolutely abominably towards the end consumer. We see journalists just gaslighting, as we said before, trying to outright lie. Or if you look at the Hunter Biden story, when they're refusing to cover stories that portray their candidate in a disfavorable light. And these, American people aren't stupid and they're not uninformed. But it's often said in business, people vote with their feet, right? They're not going to tell you, oh, I'm angry with you, so therefore I'm going to change something. What they're going to do is they're just going to stop using your services and they're going to go somewhere else. And you know what? Yeah, just a final point. It's just so negative these days, isn't it? You go on CNN and, as we do, because we have to check the left-wing arguments out, and every second post is, why white people are bad. Joe Biden came out today, apparently, and said that systemic racism is to blame for climate change. And as a white person, I don't want to be categorized as a white person, let alone labeled for all the entire world's evils. Utterly ridiculous. But I think we will leave it there. Thank you very much for watching. If you do have any feedback or comments, do please leave them below. If you like the video, like the video, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.